I just got appointed as CEO of the same company that just 3 months ago shoved me into a storage room without a single word of thanks. I stood in the boardroom. The only sound was the steady hum of the AC above. No one said a word. No one looked at me. Outside those glass windows, the city kept on buzzing. But inside me, there was only silence. 3 months ago, I walked out of this very room holding a demotion letter. No explanation, no farewell, not even a polite handshake. The man who signed it? Brad Whitman, the new CEO. The same kid who used to call me Uncle Marcus back in the day. I used to carry him on my shoulders, running around our first construction site. He once tugged on my sleeve and asked, "Uncle, why is that crane so big?" And now, he looked right through me, like I was a stranger. I've spent more than half my life building this company. I laid the first brick of our headquarters. I was the guy who fixed the leaking pipes at 2 a.m., when everyone else was asleep. I missed family vacations because a project fell behind schedule. And now, I was thrown into a dim corner of the supply room. No nameplate, nothing. I never needed recognition. But I never thought I'd be tossed aside like a broken machine. That night, I came home later than usual. Angela, my wife, was clearing the table. Noah was in the living room with his books. She looked at me, eyes full of worry. "Did they say anything?" I shook my head. "Just restructuring." Later, I turned on my phone. A message from Angela popped up. "Are you okay?" I stared at it, then left it unanswered. The next morning, I walked back in with the same old badge, but the job title had been wiped off. My new office? A tiny corner next to the supply closet on the ground floor. No windows, no nameplate, no coffee machine, just the stale smell of old paper and wood dust in the air. I sat on a creaky wooden chair, powered up the computer, and logged into the system. My email still worked, which, honestly, was the most surprising part of that day. I was going to wipe everything, delete all personal files, just to avoid trouble. But then, I saw an unread attachment sent from an internal finance address. Subject line, internal draft, Q4 merger, asset valuation. I froze. A chill ran down my spine. I wasn't in finance. There was no reason I should be getting this. And more importantly, there hadn't been a single board meeting about any merger. I opened it. Spreadsheets, charts, notes, all laid out in front of me. And I knew. What I had just seen could save hundreds of families, or disappear with the click of a button. I shut the screen, leaned back in my chair, stared up at the ceiling, paint peeling from years of neglect. Down by my feet was a rusty measuring tape, left over from one of our old sites. No anger, no shock, no tears. Just one thought kept echoing in my mind. This can't be how it ends. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 47 years old. If someone asked me, "Who are you?" I wouldn't say, "I used to be a VP." I wouldn't bring up my engineering degree or the projects I led. I'd simply say, I was the one who laid the first bricks of this company. 20 years ago, I walked into this place wearing a beat-up hard hat, dusty boots, and a rolled-up blueprint stuffed in my backpack. Back then, it was just a small workshop on the outskirts of Dallas. No air conditioning, no receptionist, no one in pressed shirts. The first project I worked on was a warehouse for a local freight company. I still remember every concrete beam, every blueprint we had to revise at midnight, and the nights it rained. I'd stay on site, wrapped in a poncho, using my backpack as a pillow. No one asked me to do that, but I knew, if I didn't step up, the project would fall behind. And someone new like me, I was easy to replace. I wasn't a talker, I wasn't into office politics, but I knew how to listen. I fixed mistakes before anyone else noticed. Most importantly, I never let my crew walk away empty-handed. Maybe that's why Henry Whitman, the founder, started paying attention to me. He wasn't the kind of boss who threw around compliments, but every time he nodded at me in a meeting, I knew I was on the right track. Henry lived by principles. One summer, with the temperature pushing 110 degrees Fahrenheit, he stopped a meeting cold just to demand the construction crew get a break, even though the delay made contractors grumble. I once fell off the second-floor scaffolding, just a twisted ankle. But Henry drove me to the hospital himself and waited there for 3 hours without saying a word. Before I left, he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You're not just staff, you're part of the foundation here." From then on, I started sitting in meetings with guys who had MBAs, drove fancy cars, and used words like supply chain ecosystem optimization. I didn't talk much. I took notes. I analyzed. Henry once told me, "I need someone who understands the ground, not just talks about it." Time passed. The company grew. Elevators were installed. We got a real office, a marketing team, even fancy year-end galas at five-star hotels. And then came Brad, Henry's son, who started learning the ropes. Brad grew up in air-conditioned hallways and 5-year strategy decks. He went to private school, graduated from Wharton, and came back with a confident smile and colorful PowerPoint slides. I was different. I grew up with sweat and wet cement under my boots. But I loved that kid like he was family. I still remember the day he came to a site as a boy, saw me in my grease-stained gear, and asked, "Uncle Marcus, why do you always wear the same clothes?" I ruffled his hair and smiled. Because guys like me, people remember us by what we do, not by what we wear. Another night, I got home close to midnight. Angela, my wife, was still up waiting. On the sofa, my son Noah had dozed off, wearing my hard hat tilted over his head. I stood there, just watching. Angela asked softly, "You working late again?" I nodded. Took the hat off Noah's head, pulled a blanket over him, and sat down to eat the cold dinner she'd saved for me. I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I just felt like I was doing the right thing. Because a great structure isn't built with just concrete. It's built with the quiet sacrifices of a man who shows up for his family. I didn't have many close friends at work. Not because I was unfriendly, just quiet. To me, respect meant doing your job well and not making things harder for others. But I remember every single person from the old engineering team. I remember who took their coffee black, who always forgot their hard hat, who passed out from the heat in 2012. I remember because I used to be one of them. And maybe it was because I knew those people so well and understood the flaws in our systems so clearly that I was eventually trusted with bigger projects. Then one day, I was made VP of engineering. No promotion board, no announcement. I never asked for anything. I just worked. Let my work speak for itself. Henry once said, "You're the only guy I can hand a project to without having to double check." To me, that meant more than any title ever could. Then, Henry started stepping back. His health was fading. He transferred most of his shares to his wife and his son, Brad Whitman, who had just returned from overseas. I still remember Brad's official welcome day. He showed up in a sharp black suit, hair slicked back, stepping out of a silver luxury car. Shook everyone's hand with that confident look in his eyes. When he got to me, Brad grinned and said, "Uncle Marcus, looks like I'm your boss now." I smiled, like I always did. As long as the boss remembers where this company came from, I'll have no problem bowing my head. I thought I'd retire when Brad had steady hands on the wheel. I didn't expect him to start building another floor, made of glass, before the concrete had even set. I wasn't against change. I wasn't scared of PowerPoint or digital transformation. But I started noticing. Things were shifting in ways that didn't feel right. The engineering budget was cut. Team meetings that used to happen weekly became quarterly. Documents I used to review were now sent straight to some tech assistant I'd never worked with. I tried to speak up. Brad just smiled. "You really think the old way can keep this company alive for the next 10 years? I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have one, but because I knew he already had his, and I wasn't part of it. I was slowly pushed out of major meetings. Once, I showed up to present, only to find my name crossed off the agenda. I asked the assistant, and she looked flustered. "I'm just following executive orders." Executive. I stepped out into the hallway, still holding my printed slides. The whole office buzzed, calls ringing, Zoom meetings, carts being wheeled around. And there I was, standing still, invisible. I looked through the glass wall and saw Brad laughing with a group of strangers. Light from their room cast their reflections sharp and clear on the glass. Mine was faint, fading in the background, like I wasn't even there. When money speaks, memory is forced to fall silent. That night, I went home. Angela had dinner waiting. Noah had dozed off on the sofa again, with my old plastic hard hat crooked on his head. I stood there, quietly watching. Angela asked gently, "Rough day?" I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Nah, all good. Every day's a chance to learn something new." I said it to ease her mind, so Noah wouldn't wake up to the sound of his father's sighs. I kept telling myself, maybe it'll all work out. Until that one morning, the morning I got called up to the executive floor. The whole thing took 5 minutes. No explanation, no conversation, no goodbye, not even eye contact, from the boy I once carried on my shoulders. That morning, I received a strange email from the executive team. No subject line, no attachments, just one line. Please report to room 1204 at 9 a.m. Room 1204 wasn't a regular meeting room. It was a small conference space tucked away at the end of the executive floor hallway. Secluded, no windows, no cameras, and more importantly, only used when something sensitive came up. I arrived on time, opened the door. Inside were 3 people, Brad, Karen from HR, and a man in a suit who looked like a lawyer. Brad didn't greet me, didn't smile, didn't ask how I'd been. He stood up, pulled out a neatly stapled document from his case. "Uncle Marcus, the board has agreed to reassign you to a non-active technical advisor position, starting tomorrow. Your access will be updated in the system later today." His voice was flat, like he was reading off a script. I wasn't surprised, but I looked at him, really looked, not to ask why, but to see if there was anything left, anything at all, of the little boy who once held my sleeve at a construction site. Nothing. Just emptiness. Karen gently slid a folder toward me. Reassignment documents, remaining benefits, insurance coverage until the end of the quarter, and a non-disclosure agreement. I didn't sign. I didn't speak. I just looked at Brad. Not with anger, but the way you'd look at a building you once designed, being torn down by the very people who once called you mentor. And in that moment, something became painfully clear. Sometimes, people don't have to hate you to leave you behind. They just have to stop seeing you as important. I stood up, gave a small nod. I didn't bow. I didn't lash out. I walked out of that room empty-handed, but not ashamed. Down the hall, I passed faces I once knew well. Some glanced at me, then quickly looked down at their phones, pretending to be busy. The way they avoided my eyes hurt more than any formal goodbye. I didn't blame them. I understood. They were afraid of being dragged down with me. In a place where loyalty was measured by how often you updated a KPI sheet, who could say they were truly safe? Back at my old workspace, my badge had already been deactivated. A young IT guy, probably Noah's age, had been sent to assist me with any data retrieval. He hesitated. "Sir, is there anything I can help you with?" I smiled. "No worries. I just need a few moments with this desk." He nodded and quietly stepped out. I sat down, booted up the computer, logged in. One last time. Inbox, empty. All my engineering folders, where I'd poured thousands of hours of work, had either been moved or erased. I opened the drafts folder, where I kept half-finished notes. One file remained, an analysis on a new thermal insulation technique for concrete. I'd spent 6 months on that. Now, no one even cared to read it. I opened the drawer and pulled out an old photo. Me, Angela, and Noah, standing in front of the first project I ever led. The edges were curled, the silver frame faded, but the look in our eyes, still full of hope. I used to believe, if you just did good work, no one could take away the value you created. I was wrong. I packed up what little I had into a small cardboard box. Not much. A Parker pen Henry gave me back in 2010, a Lego crane Noah built in 2nd grade, and a rusty box cutter, the one tool I'd never thrown away. Each of those, a piece of memory from a man who once thought he was irreplaceable. I carried the box and headed out. At the end of the hallway, I saw Emily, the structural design lead. I trained her myself, back in her early days. She froze, eyes red. She looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't. Just gave me a small nod. I nodded back, softly, and kept walking. I left the office just before noon. It was August. The sun was harsh, but I felt cold. I drove without direction. No radio, no music. Just the low hum of the engine, like the heartbeat of someone coming to after a punch in the gut. I pulled into an old lot, behind the site of the very first project I ever managed. It's just a row of cold storage units now, but I remember it well. Right there, by that red brick wall, I once taught a group of young workers how to test cement with their bare hands. And right there, Henry once put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You're the foundation I can build an entire tower on." Now all that's left is peeling paint and a for lease sign. I got home. Angela opened the door. She saw my face and knew. She didn't ask anything. She just hugged me, tight. No words, no tears. I whispered, "They did the one thing I always thought they'd never dare." Angela looked at me. Not surprised, not angry. She just said, "Maybe now. You can finally rest, right?" I didn't know whether to nod or shake my head, because to me, rest always felt like a luxury I didn't deserve. The days after that blurred together, like one long afternoon nap. No emails, no meetings, no 8 a.m. calls. I made slow breakfasts, cleaned out the garage, dusted off the old table saw I never finished repairing. Some days, I just sat in the backyard for hours, watching the shadows of trees fall across the concrete, wondering, when no one needs you anymore, who are you? Angela didn't ask. Noah didn't change. But I knew, in their eyes, I was no longer the man who stood like stone in the middle of a storm. I'd lost more than a job title. I'd lost the feeling of being the pillar. A week later, I got a call from Roger, an old colleague from cost estimation. "I've got something I think you should see." That afternoon, Roger came by with a USB stick. While reviewing the storage system before the transition, I noticed some files had their timestamps altered. Only one person used that technique before. He paused. "You." I opened the USB. The first file was the presentation I'd prepared for the thermal optimized concrete project. Every chart, every annotation, it was mine. But the name on top now? Ethan, Brad's new assistant. I sat in silence. Roger lowered his eyes. "I think this was planned. They phased you out, rewrote the data, and claimed the credit." I kept digging. Diagrams I'd drafted were now chopped up, renamed, and scattered across different files to justify someone else's ownership. So this is what 20 years of building turns into: a ladder for someone else to climb without ever looking down. No one stole anything outright. They just removed my work, brick by brick, and rebuilt it into something that looked the same, but had no soul. Roger sighed. "I don't know what you'll do, but I thought you deserve to know." That night, I sat alone in the backyard. Angela came out and sat beside me. She didn't ask questions. She just said softly, "If they took your job, don't let them take the reason you started." That sentence hit me like a quiet explosion. I looked up at the soft glow of the porch light shining through the branches, then back down at the USB on the table. I wasn't done, and I couldn't let someone else write my ending. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was angry, but because, for the first time in weeks, I felt alive again. I opened my old laptop, the one I used to draft the first load-bearing frame designs. Folder by folder, file by file, I combed through everything, like an old builder inspecting cracks in a house he once built with bare hands. And it became clear, Ethan, Brad's new assistant, had created nothing. He just took what I left behind, changed the titles, stripped the metadata, and submitted it like it was some next-gen technical breakthrough. So this is what 20 years of building turns into: a ladder for someone else to climb, without ever looking down. At first light, I called Roger. "I need system logs from the past 3 months, every file that's been pulled, edited, or reassigned. And I want to know who downloaded that presentation first." Roger hesitated. "What are you planning to do?" I answered slowly. "I'm not here for revenge, but I won't let the truth get buried. 2 days later, I had everything. Access logs, timestamps, evidence of copied files renamed under someone else's credentials, and those subtle edits, small but undeniable, that only I could recognize. That evening, as I was cross-checking the files, I got a message from a former engineer I once mentored as an intern. I don't know whether to laugh or cry, but word is, Ethan's being considered for regional tech leadership, all thanks to his recent innovations. I set the pen down. Ethan hadn't just stolen. He was being rewarded. I sat in the old storage room behind our house. Angela walked in, placed a cup of coffee next to me, and said nothing. She just looked at me, long and steady. "You're doing the right thing, aren't you?" I nodded. She turned to leave, but before she stepped out, she said, "Then don't let anger lead the way. Let your values speak for you." I didn't go to the press. I didn't post anything online. Instead, I reached out to Brian, an old investment advisor who once worked with Henry during the early transitions. A man who understood not just systems, but people. We met at a small cafe by the train station, the same place Henry and I once sketched out a cross-functional management model on a napkin. I laid it all out, no spin, no filter, from start to finish, including the part where I stayed silent for too long. Brian listened, then asked one question. "What do you want?" I answered, calm. "I don't want my old title back. I don't need recognition. I just want this, that those who cheated their way to the top no longer stand there. And if this company still carries Henry's name, then it should be led by people who respect real values." Brian nodded. "I'll verify everything. But if what you've given me checks out, this isn't just unethical. It may be illegal." 3 days later, I got an email. Janet, the senior CFO, who stood beside Henry for 15 years, wanted to meet, privately. I arrived at the company headquarters on a quiet Monday morning, like any other. But I knew today would be different. Janet was waiting for me in a conference room on the 23rd floor, the closed administration level, the kind of room where no meeting ever left a paper trail. She walked in, holding a folder. No handshake, no small talk. "I've reviewed everything. The system logs, the file history, the presentation Ethan submitted to the board. It's clear. He copied everything from you. The problem is, it was signed off by Brad and the entire tech division." I nodded slightly. Not surprised. Brad approved it. If things blow up, he'll pin it on Ethan. Ethan will plead ignorance, and the company will choose silence to avoid a scandal. Janet paused, then placed her hand on the table. "I won't let that happen." Turns out, she had been watching ever since I was demoted. She tried warning the board, but was dismissed for lack of evidence. Now, she had more than enough. We laid out a plan. Nothing loud, nothing theatrical, just the right people, knowing the truth, at the right time. 3 days later, I received a formal invitation to attend the quarterly technical strategy review, as an honored guest invited by the Internal Oversight Board. I showed up in an old suit, wearing the tie Angela picked out for my very first interview, 20 years ago. Brad was there. So was Ethan. Both looked visibly stunned to see me. I simply nodded, as if greeting someone who borrowed something and forgot to return it. The meeting began. Ethan presented his groundbreaking project. Each slide, every chart, every line of data, I knew by heart, because I created them. When he finished, one board member asked, "Can you walk us through how you developed the idea?" Ethan stumbled. His eyes darted to Brad. Brad kept his tone steady. The concept was analyzed by our advisory group. Ethan compiled and delivered it. That's when Janet spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a presentation that matches 98% of this content, created a year ago by Mr. Marcus, who's seated with us today." Silence. I plugged in my USB, displayed every step, the raw drafts, the revisions, the simulations, complete with system logs and user timestamps. No one said a word, but I could feel it. The wind had shifted. Brad stood up, trying to hold composure. It could be a coincidence, or maybe Marcus shared the data without realizing. I looked up, calm, firm. "You're right. I did believe in sharing, for growth, but I never shared so someone else could take what I lived and breathed for 2 decades and use it to step over my name. No response. Ethan lowered his head. The meeting ended in silence, but I knew it was the silence that follows a thaw, when things buried too long finally come to light. That night, I got word. Ethan was placed on temporary suspension. Brad was removed from all technical review roles pending independent investigation. The board invited me to return as an independent senior advisor, outside Brad's chain of command, free from internal constraints. I didn't reply right away. I stood on the balcony, watching the office lights shimmer in the distance. Angela joined me, handed me a warm cup of tea. She asked, "Do you want to go back?" I smiled, not sure if it was from relief, or because, after everything, I was still myself. Maybe it's time to write it all over again, but this time on my own terms. I didn't respond to the board's offer right away, not because I was unsure, but because for the first time in years, I realized I had a choice. No more being assigned, no more chasing after decisions made by someone else. I took a walk around the old construction site, the place where it all began 20 years ago. Now, it's a giant supermarket. No more smell of cement dust, no more drilling noises. But in my memory, I could still hear it all. The guys calling each other under the blazing sun, the thud of bricks hitting the ground when we raised the final beam. I remember thinking back then, do good work, and everything will work out. Turns out, sometimes, good work still isn't enough. 2 days later, I called Janet. I'm not taking the old role back, and I'm not interested in being a hands-off advisor who just signs papers. She paused, then asked slowly, "What are you thinking?" I answered, without hesitation. I want to build an independent technical unit, still part of the system, but with its own voice, focused on training young engineers, developing practical solutions, and most importantly, protecting internal innovation from being manipulated. She stayed quiet for a moment, then said, "You're giving up power to go back to engineering?" I smiled. I never really left it. It was just hidden for a while. A week later, the unit launched. I named it The Foundry. Not flashy. No red carpet. Just a place where things are shaped again. By real hands, with real values. I had only one condition. I choose the people. No interference. On day one, over 80 emails came in. Some were from old colleagues. Some from people who had stayed silent when I was demoted. And one name made me stop for a moment. Ethan. I stared at it for a few minutes, then opened the message. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for a chance. I need to relearn from the man I once underestimated. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part, the part that remembered being young, making mistakes, knew this. Sometimes people change, only after hitting bottom. I invited Ethan to meet, made no promises. That morning, he showed up, no longer the confident kid I once knew. His face was drawn, shirt wrinkled, eyes nervous, like a child who'd broken something important. I didn't speak. I waited. He finally said, "I used to think that as long as things looked good and I could talk well, I'd get ahead. But when everything crashed, I realized the only thing that stays with you is what you truly built yourself." I stayed silent. I know I hurt you. I damaged the values this place was built on. But if there's any chance left, I want to start over, from wherever you'll have me. I exhaled slowly. You don't need my forgiveness. You need to forgive yourself by never making that mistake again. He lowered his head. I pointed at the assignment board. Team 3's short one hand on the 3D concrete modeling unit. You've got a 3-month trial. After that, they decide, not me. He stood up, bowed deeply. I said nothing more, but deep down, I knew. Justice isn't always about exposing someone. Sometimes, it's about giving them the chance to rebuild. This time, with integrity. 3 months passed. The foundry, once an old abandoned workshop, had become one of the busiest technical hubs in the entire Eastern Division. No flashy sign, no marketing gimmicks, just short briefings, half-finished models, and workers in oil-stained shirts, with eyes full of confidence. Marcus, once demoted without a word, was now sought out by engineers across departments for advice. But he stayed true to his role. No title, no leadership chair, just a quiet corner, surrounded by blueprints, cold coffee, and eyes that listened before they spoke. Ethan was there too. At first, quiet, hesitant. But slowly, he started asking questions instead of giving answers. For the first time, he stayed after hours to help build a prototype with his team. For the first time, he admitted a miscalculation and owned it. And then one day, something unexpected happened. Ethan stood up during the weekly meeting and asked to step down as team lead, returning instead as a project engineer. He said, "I've come to understand I'm not ready to lead, because a true leader serves first." No one said a word, but their eyes, quiet yet warm, were the kind of recognition Ethan had never earned before. One late afternoon, Janet visited the foundry. She looked around, then said, "You know, Marcus, you don't have a formal title, but they all call you boss." Marcus chuckled and shook his head. "I don't have a position anymore." Janet sipped her tea, speaking softly. "Some bosses don't need a title. They're called that, because others choose to trust them." That night, as Marcus closed up the shop, he stepped into the hallway. Warm yellow light poured across the wall, covered in blueprints and models in progress. On the whiteboard, scrawled by a new intern, were the words, "Here, we don't build walls, we build people." Marcus stood there, reading it for a while. Then he picked up a marker and added a quiet line underneath. "And sometimes, from broken men, we build leaders." Out there, no one would list his name under company leadership. No newspapers would print a photo of him cutting ribbons. But in the hearts of those he listened to, guided, and believed in, Marcus was the one they called boss. And this time, no one could ever demote him again. Rumors spread fast, as always. No official statement was made, but across the entire engineering division, everyone knew Brad was on his way out. A quiet internal investigation had concluded his accidental approval of the plagiarized material wasn't accidental at all. No one said it aloud in meetings, but in the hallways, in the cafeteria, in exchanged glances, people stopped mentioning his name as if trying to erase any connection. One early winter morning, with wind biting and the sky heavy gray, I received a message from an unknown number. "Marcus, it's me, Brad. If you have 10 minutes, I'd like to meet. Not to apologize, just to clarify a few things." I stared at the message. No anger, no resentment, just curiosity. We met at a small cafe near the park. The same place Henry first brought me when offering me the job. Brad arrived before me. Sunken eyes, worn suit. No longer the man who once commanded a boardroom. I sat down. No handshake. He looked at me for a moment, then said, "You probably see me as a traitor. Maybe you're right." I stayed silent. "But what you don't know is," Henry once told me, "if this company depends too much on one man, it won't survive once that man is gone. And when everyone started praising you, I got scared." Brad let out a bitter chuckle, almost mocking himself. "I was afraid you'd replace me, afraid I was just keeping the seat warm, and I let that fear run the show." I exhaled. For the first time in years, I no longer saw him as a rival, just a man shaken by the tides of change. "I'm not here to justify myself," Brad continued, "only to say, I know I was wrong, and I'm stepping down. But before I go, I have one request." I looked at him, waiting. "Don't turn the foundry into a fortress of opposition. Let it be a place where the next generation of engineers doesn't have to pick sides. Only what's right." I nodded. I never wanted to draw battle lines. I just wanted good people to be allowed to stand by their values. Brad stayed quiet, then stood up. Before leaving, he paused. "If I ever did one thing right, maybe it was nominating you as team lead back then, even if I didn't have the courage to stand by you." He turned and walked away. Didn't wait for an answer. After the meeting with Brad, I went back to the foundry. Not to do anything special, just to sit. I sat alone in the small back office, where light slanted through the old window pane, casting warped shadows across the desk. It's where I'd often reread old designs, tweak rough drafts, or simply sit in silence, listening to the soft crackle of welding sparks outside. Strangely, I didn't feel triumphant. No thrill of winning, no release like settling a long-standing debt. Just the quiet sense of closing a chapter I no longer felt the need to reopen. A few days later, the board sent an official letter. Marcus Turner, nominated for Vice President of Engineering, overseeing company-wide innovation strategy. I read it 3 times, each time with a different feeling. They called me the one who turned the tide, the man who restored the core values of internal engineering. But my heart didn't race. Angela looked at me, proud but concerned. "Will you accept it?" I smiled. Not forced, just honest. I think I finally found where I truly belong, and it's not inside a soundproof boardroom. I drafted a short reply. I'm grateful for the nomination, but I respectfully decline. Not out of criticism, but because I believe some values don't need official recognition, as long as they continue to create real change. Let me stay at the foundry, where I know I'm needed most. Sincerely, Marcus. Turning down that title didn't mean walking away from responsibility. If anything, I felt freer than ever, no longer bound by 5-year visions or cold KPI charts. I could choose people for their character, not their resume. I could sit with an intern for hours to fix a single error, without needing someone to approve my time. Then one day, while guiding the team through a load simulation model, Ethan walked up to me, hands slightly trembling, holding a letter. It was a resignation. I looked at him, didn't ask, just waited. He spoke. "I've been offered a full scholarship, simulation engineering in Germany." I hesitated, because what I've learned here means more than any school ever could. He bowed his head. "But if I don't go, I won't be strong enough to come back and truly give back." I nodded, folded the letter, slipped it into my pocket. "You don't owe this place anything, but I believe one day you'll return, and this time you'll come back as yourself." At Ethan's farewell, we sat around unfinished blueprints. No speeches, just the soft clink of plastic cups, quiet laughter, and eyes full of hope. Angela came to pick me up. On the ride home, she asked, "Do you regret it?" I looked back at the row of lights fading behind us. No, I just feel grateful. Because after everything, I didn't choose the highest road. I chose the right one. In December that year, snow fell earlier than usual. I arrived at the workshop early, just to catch the frost, clinging to the glass, and the thin layer of snow on the foundry sign. No one else was there yet, and they didn't know. I had a new habit today, sitting down and writing. I wasn't drafting designs, nor writing an annual report. I wrote for myself, not to brag, but to record what I'd learned, not at school or from textbooks, but from the moments I'd been knocked down. I wrote, "When you're pushed out from a place you dedicated 2 decades to, you no longer feel like yourself. But that's also when you get the chance to look back, who you are and what truly matters." I remembered the day I was demoted. The buzzing office, people avoiding eye contact, and me. No idea where to look. Back then, I thought I'd lost everything. Now I realize I didn't lose. I shed what didn't belong to me anymore, like an old tree pruned of rotten branches, allowing new shoots to grow. Like a man standing at an edge, forced to choose, fall or walk forward with his own feet. I used to think becoming the boss meant being higher than others, giving orders, making decisions. But in the end, I learned that being a boss means staying when others walk away, listening when they argue, and standing by what's right, even alone. Someone asked me, "Don't you regret the wasted years? Aren't you angry at Brad, Ethan, anyone who hurt you?" I just shook my head, because I understand. Forgiveness isn't a gift to them. It's a gift to myself, so I don't carry the burden onward. Ethan had left to study abroad, but last week he sent me a photo. It was of a small simulation workshop in Germany. On the door, a sign read, "Mini Foundry, Because we build people, not walls. I looked at that picture for a long time. I didn't reply right away. But inside, I knew. What I planted isn't lost. It travels farther than I ever imagined. Angela brought in coffee and placed it on the desk without a word. She looked at me and leaned gently against the door. I smiled and asked, "Do you remember when I almost sold everything and moved?" She nodded and smiled. "I also remember you standing on the balcony, hands shaking but your eyes steady. We didn't need more words, just a firm squeeze of hands. A cold morning, warmed by our hearts." I stepped out of the office and walked the hallway lit by workshop lamps. The engineers were already there, laughing and working. They didn't know. I was watching them with all my belief and gratitude unspoken. I'm no longer the one who signs budgets, nor listed in quarterly reports, but I have a place in the hearts of those who choose what's right. And for me, that is enough. Late that morning, I returned to the whiteboard, the one with the intern's quote, "Here, we don't build walls, we build people." I picked up a marker and wrote another line. This time, not in English, but in the truth I'd come to after this journey. Cam on vija tung gai jo. Novai, toi moi hok juoch kach jung de, jung ngia. Thank you for letting me break. Because of it, I learned how to stand up, for real. Then I set down the pen and stepped outside to breathe in the cold air. Snow was still falling, but my heart was warm. Marcus, once demoted without warning, no longer needs anyone to call him boss. Because to those who stayed, he is their guide. And to himself, he has learned to walk, without bowing again.